Hey, welcome back to the South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast by Ohio State fans, for Ohio State fans from the West Coast. I'm your host, Zach Moore. Today is Sunday, October 6th, 2024, and thank you for joining me while I talk to myself about Ohio State's 35-7 home win over Iowa yesterday afternoon in the Horseshoe. I thought I had a pretty good handle on this game going into it. I thought this would be a rock fight for a couple of quarters, and it was. A salty Iowa defense frustrated the Buckeyes on offense in the first half, forcing 2 turnovers and coming up with another stop on downs. Despite outgaining the Hawkeyes 199-90 and living on Iowa's side of the field for most of the first half, the Buckeyes only led 7-0 at halftime. Now, in our preview pod on Thursday, I cautioned Buckeye fans that they would have to be patient for it to happen, but that Ohio State would eventually blow this game open and finish what I thought would be a 35-6 victory. As we know, the final was 35-7, so I was pretty close. A friend of the pod, Juan Yanesa, also had a pretty good beat on this game as well. He had a final of 35-13. Our friend PVH wasn't too far off either. He had his score prediction at 39-10. Now, as we've seen this team do almost every single Saturday so far this season, the Buckeyes landed a flurry of haymakers. This time it was early in the third quarter to turn the lights out on the Hawkeyes. Ohio State opened the third quarter with an 86-yard scoring drive, punctuated by a 53-yard pass play from Will Howard to Jeremiah Smith, then another one-handed touchdown grab by Smith on the very next play. 7 seconds later, Jack Sawyer would jar the ball loose from Iowa quarterback Cade McNamara. Cody Simon would fall on it at the Iowa 19-yard line. And then 3 plays later, Will Howard would score on a 4-yard touchdown run. And in the blink of an eye, the Buckeyes had a 21-0 lead. And that was pretty much your ball game. Now, I felt there were 2 matchups that were must-wins for Ohio State to prevail in this game. The first was the Buckeye linebackers and safeties against Iowa star running back Caleb Johnson and tight end Luke Lachey. Now, last week against Michigan State, the Buckeyes finished with their lowest tackling grade of the season of 48.6 according to PFF. They had several starters grade out in the 20s in tackling. And we remember it was a rough night for Sonny Styles in coverage against Sparty's tight ends. Styles finished with a dreadful coverage grade of 42.9 last Saturday. But yesterday, things were much improved. Caleb Downs and Lathan Ransom both finished with tackling grades of over 79 according to PFF. Downs and Ransom combined for 3 tackles for loss. And Sonny Styles had by far his best game of the season. Styles led the Buckeyes in tackles with 7. That included 2 tackles for loss. He finished with his highest overall PFF grade of the season of 75.3. He had his highest coverage grade of the season of 69.5. Personally, I don't think those grades really account for how impactful Styles was in this game. I thought he was all over the field. Clearly the best game he's had, perhaps, in his Ohio State career so far. Caleb Johnson finished the afternoon with only 86 yards rushing. That was 85 yards below his season average. And don't be fooled by his 5.7 yard per carry average in this game. Johnson only had 51 yards on 12 carries after 3 quarters. He was able to pad his stats against Ohio State reserves in the fourth quarter, and that included his only touchdown run of the game from 28 yards out, with the Buckeyes leading 35-0. And tight end Luke Lachey was held to 39 yards on 5 catches. Lachey was not a factor in this game at all. Now, after a 2-game absence, the Ohio State defensive front was buoyed by the return of star defensive tackle Tyleik Williams. Williams finished with an excellent PFF grade of 87.1, including a team-high grade of 84.9 for rush defense. When you have the big fella in the middle mixing it up, it makes life much easier for your linebackers and safeties. And I don't think it was any coincidence that Sonny Styles had his best game of the season with Williams back in the lineup. And if you're watching the game, your eyes would tell you that, the defensive line was winning up front. And Williams was a big part of that. Now, defensive end Jack Sawyer was also a force in this game. He led the Buckeyes in pressures with 5 and sacks with 1.5, which included a strip sack of Cade McNamara in the third quarter. Nose tackle Ty Hamilton also had by far his best game of the season. Hamilton finished with the defense's highest PFF grade of 90.8. He also had a strip sack of Cade McNamara early in the fourth quarter. So excellent performance by the Ohio State defensive line. And for the second consecutive game, the Buckeyes forced 3 turnovers. Davison Igbinosun added to that total with a third quarter interception of Cade McNamara. The Silver Bullets finished with 4 sacks, 9 tackles for loss. Now, if you're a regular listener of this podcast, then you know I've been complaining incessantly about the lack of lost yardage plays and turnovers from this Ohio State defense the last couple of seasons. We remember last season, the Buckeyes finished 60th nationally in sacks, 65th in tackles for loss, 124th in takeaways. Well, after 5 games this season, the Buckeyes are all the way up to 12th nationally in sacks. They're tied for 20th in tackles for loss, and they're 26th in takeaways. Ohio State has 9 takeaways in 5 games after forcing only 11 in 13 games last season, which was their lowest total in well over 50 years. And the cool thing is the uptick in lost yardage plays and turnovers so far have not come at the expense of allowing long scrimmage plays by the opponent. The Buckeyes are number 1 in the country in opponent scrimmage plays of 20-plus yards and 30-plus yards. They've not allowed a play over 40 or 50 yards either. As we sit here today, Ohio State is also number 1 nationally in total defense, defensive yards per play, and scoring defense. They're 3rd nationally against the run. They're 4th nationally against the pass. Now, those gaudy numbers will be tested next Saturday in Autzen Stadium against an explosive Oregon offense. But through 5 games, it's hard to imagine things going any better for the Buckeye defense than they are right now. Now, the other key matchup against Iowa that I mentioned in our preview pod was the Ohio State receivers against the Iowa secondary. As I mentioned on Thursday, the Hawkeyes do not have a Cooper DeJean in their secondary this year. They have some good DBs, including a really good slot corner in Sebastian Castro, who played well yesterday. Give him credit. He had an interception of Will Howard just before halftime. But I think it's safe to say the Iowa pass defense is several notches below its usual standard. And I thought the Ohio State receivers would be able to make a lot of plays in this game. Now, it did take a couple of quarters for it to happen, but Emeka Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith eventually had their way with the Iowa secondary. They combined for 160 yards receiving on 13 reception and 4 touchdown catches. Now, I'd like to pause for just one moment amidst all the Jeremiah Smith hype to appreciate Emeka Egbuka. Egbuka finished the day with 3 contested touchdown catches with Iowa DBs draped all over him, in his jersey. Egbuka has spent his entire career at Ohio State overshadowed by other great receivers. If you think about it, as a freshman, he was relegated to returning kickoffs, while Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Jackson Smith-Njigba, those guys put up huge numbers in 2021. Then the last 2 seasons, Egbuka was eclipsed by Marvin Harrison Jr.'s greatness. And now this season, Jeremiah Smith is getting all the hype. Egbuka has been the consummate pro throughout his career at Ohio State. And in addition to everything he can do with the ball in his hands, he's also become an excellent run blocker this season. Look, Egbuka could have been wide receiver 1 at 100 other programs from the minute he stepped on campus. But he chose to come to Ohio State, where he's bided his time, he's stayed patient, he's waited for his opportunities. He also endured a very frustrating injury-plagued 2023 season. And now, to his credit, he's on pace to break the school record for career receiving yards that Michael Jenkins has held for the last 20 years. So, good on you, Emeka. You're going to leave Columbus as one of the most productive receivers in program history. And I think you're going to make an NFL franchise very, very happy next April. Now, one area where I was totally wrong yesterday was the Ohio State rushing attack. I thought it was going to be tough sledding for Trey Henderson and Quinshon Judkins against Jay Higgins and those Iowa defensive tackles. The Hawkeyes came into this game 4th nationally, allowing only 62 yards per game. But yesterday, the Buckeyes finished with 203 yards rushing on 40 carries. Quinshon Judkins averaged 6 yards a carry. Henderson averaged 5.5. In what I thought was a significant line of scrimmage test for the Ohio State offensive line, I thought the Buckeyes passed with flying colors. Tegra Shabola, Donovan Jackson, and Seth McLaughlin all rose to the challenge of facing Iowa defensive tackles Yahya Black and Aaron Graves. Shabola, Jackson, and McLaughlin all finished with run blocking grades in the 70s. And your eyes would tell you, as you watch the game, that they were winning that battle at the line of scrimmage. And I thought as a unit, the Ohio State offensive line was excellent again in pass blocking against Iowa. The Hawkeyes finished with only 7 pressures yesterday. I thought Will Howard was really good yesterday, 21 of 25 for 209 yards, 4 touchdown passes, and 1 rushing touchdown. He completed his first 10 passes of the game. Now, he did have a couple of throws late in the second quarter that I'm sure he'd love to have back, including the interception to Sebastian Castro just before halftime. Howard also overthrew Jeremiah Smith on a deep ball where I thought Smith had inside leverage on the cornerback, and if it was just a decent throw, maybe even slightly underthrown, it's a touchdown. But look, all 3 of Howard's touchdown passes to Emeka Egbuka were dots in super tight coverage. He also had a gorgeous throw over the middle to Brandon Inniss on 4th down and 2 to extend an Ohio State scoring drive late in the third quarter. I know some fans got a little frustrated with Howard late in the second quarter, but give Phil Parker and the Iowa defense a little credit. They made some adjustments there. They took away some of the easy throws Howard was able to make, took away some of those throwing lanes. I talked to Paige and Juan at halftime, and, we thought Ohio State, after the way things panned out at the end of the second quarter, we thought Ohio State might just try to lean on the running game in the second half. But give Ryan Day and Chip Kelly credit. They would not allow the Iowa defense to dictate their approach on offense in the second half, and give Will Howard credit as well. Look, they allowed Howard to continue to throw, and their faith in Howard was rewarded. Howard was 8 of 8 for 120 yards passing and 2 touchdown passes in the second half. I absolutely love that. So, on a day when 3 top 10 teams had their asses handed to them by lesser opponents, including number 1 Alabama and number 4 Tennessee, the Buckeyes were explosive, they were balanced, they dominated the line of scrimmage against the quality Big Ten opponent. When we talked about it on Thursday, Iowa came into this game number 17 in the SP Plus rankings. This was a quality win, and a performance Ohio State fans should feel very good about heading into the matchup with Oregon next Saturday, which is now guaranteed to be a top 3 matchup with Bama and Tennessee losing last night. Looks like it's going to be a number 2 versus number 3 matchup for pole position in the Big Ten. I cannot wait for that game. Now, all due respect to Oregon, who's playing much better now. They're finally playing up to the standard that we thought, we'd see before the season started. I'm feeling really good about Ohio State's chances in that game. The early line is Ohio State minus 3.5. Oregon is coming off a 31-10 win over Michigan State on Friday night. Now, if you compare the box scores from Ohio State's win over Michigan State and Oregon's win over Sparty, they're almost identical. The Buckeyes and Ducks both took 31-point leads into the fourth quarter against Sparty. They would appear to be very evenly matched. But I feel like Ohio State has an answer for everything that Oregon does well. I'm not sure we can say the same about Oregon. I'm going to have a lot more to say about this game on Thursday. I cannot wait to break this game down with Paige and Chad. Ohio State, Oregon is also just one of a bunch of really juicy matchups next Saturday that we're going to look at. So, okay, look, that's going to do it for me. Check your feeds on Thursday evening for a preview of the Oregon game. Until then, thanks so much for listening, and go Bucks. You've been listening to The South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast. Follow us on X at South_Stands.